And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The Naked City, the city of, well, 1,000 stories. We're going to try to tell a few tonight. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_Radio. And of course, the mothership, CoalitionRadio.us. There's a new section on the homepage there, CoalitionRadio.us. It's called Liberty News. You'll see in that releases from the American Civil Liberties Union, the FIRE, the Goldwater Institute, and a variety of work groups working to enhance civil liberties, basic freedoms, sexual rights, anti-decriminalization, essentially allowing us to amplify the work of organizations around the country who are sharing with us on an ongoing basis their groundbreaking work, well, again, in improving the life of all of us and creating an environment where people, whether it be through the free market or through the advocacy of their civil rights, can improve the quality of their lives. We've got a couple of hot topics on the show tonight. This show, the Coalition Radio, I'm proud to say, has spent over 100 hours broadcasting from a variety of sources, workers, allies, politicians, supporting the efforts of decriminalization of sex work, well, around the globe. We'll continue to do so, and we'll be focusing on that tonight from a news source. Folks who are literally on the front lines and enjoying a level of success heretofore thought impossible. In the second hour, we're going to be talking with folks from RI Transit Riders. And we're going to be talking about, again, an effort by wealthy, connected politicians to use public money to take away, minimalize, marginalize, if you will, one of the most important places in this city, and of course I'm talking about Kennedy Plaza, in an effort to whitewash an area, to disabuse people of the notion that the working poor and the visibly poor live here in Providence, in an attempt to create their own little private Idaho right here in the center of town. Well, let's get right down to it. In the world of activism, very often the news reports on the more dramatic aspects, the victories, the losses, those televised moments when the red light flashes on. But the reality is, in the world of activism, folks can spend hundreds of hours, months, if not years, without seeing significant progress, despite the yeoman-like, heroic efforts of many. And in fact, there are often times where you're, quite frankly, feel like you're just plugging your fingers in the leaking sieve and trying to just hold the current ground, the status quo, if you will. The thought of actual success seems so tangibly close yet so far away. Which is why it's important when there is a victory by an organization, when our causes are advanced, when people's lives are improved, when they're given access to their basic liberties, when dignity is restored. We need to celebrate it. And the folks I'm about to have on have, in my belief, had an historic victory down in the District of Columbia. Tamika Spellman is joining us. She's a policy and advocacy advocate with HIPS and with Decrim Now. Originally from Buffalo, New York, she's lived in D.C. on and off since 1988. Tamika has worked with HIPS since June 2017. Served, and this is an astonishing breadth of experiences, a peer educator, part of a needle exchange program. She's volunteered her time with mobile services, giving new work and safer supplies to people throughout the District of Columbia. She's experienced firsthand seeing exactly what the war on drugs has done to a vibrant community. She's dedicated to helping others and working to create positive policies and laws to help those involved in sex work and drug use. She's testified on behalf of HIPS at the D.C. District of Columbia City Council, spoken on several harm reduction panels, and is very active in both SWAC and the D.C. Lead Coalition. HIPS is extremely honored to have Tamika as part of their policy and advocacy team. This organization, Decrim Now, in conjunction with HIPS and an alliance of several community organizations, has managed to get a decriminalization statute onto, if you will, the docket, into the works of the District of Columbia, the City Council. Let's celebrate that for a moment and applaud their successes. Tamika, welcome to the coalition for the first time. Thanks for joining us on a Friday night.
Not a problem. Thank you for welcoming me.
Well, it's, unless you've experienced DC politics, I'm not sure if it's possible to understand how supercharged they are. The District of Columbia.
I kind of lost you there. Can you start that over again?
Sure. Unless you've experienced DC politics, unless you've had a kind of a catbird seat on what goes on there, I don't know if folks can really understand how hypercharged Washington, DC politics are. The Congress, if you will, has a unique role, if you will, in being involved in the District of Columbia's budget and involved in sort of an oversight. And for an organization that has, quite frankly, difficulty in overseeing themselves and is responsible for abominations like FOSTA and SESTA, it's the deepest irony that they would choose to immerse themselves in DC politics. So in that light, I just want to offer you our heartfelt congratulations on moving the needle to a point where decriminalization of sex work is actually being considered to become the law of the land, at least in DC. So congratulations.
Yes, thank you. We've done some significant work to get it to this point. Working with our city council, talking to them and trying to get them on board. We started out in 2017 with 2 council members, and we have increased to a total of 5 that are co-sponsoring the bill now.
Right. Now, there's already been interference from Congress. There's a representative, Andy Harris. He's a Republican, I believe, from Maryland. And, for an issue that should be decided from the people of D.C., what has he attempted to do?
Yes, that is a very, very good question, and she got shot down in the end because they were trying to squelch our voices by attacking our budget and saying that it could not be financed. But Congress people decided against supporting it because they felt like DC should have its autonomy.
Right.
And we, as a coalition, met up with Eleanor Holmes Norton to solidify that we would still have autonomy in making decisions for the District of Columbia. Because in my opinion, the federal government are hosts to us as a city. We run DC, and they're just visitors in our city.
Right. And for those who are not familiar with DC politics, I believe Ms. Holmes Norton is your congressperson, correct?
Yes, Eleanor Holmes Norton is our representative in Congress.
Right. So give us a little bit of a backdrop. Tell us, the HIPS organization is, and if I read correctly, if I understand correctly, is part of a sort of a quilt, if you will, of organizations that have banded together in support of Decrim Now. So tell us a little bit about HIPS, its origin, and your work there.
All right. HIPS started in 1993 as 2 people in a band with an idea to work with people that were based in street-based economies, primarily sex workers in the District of Columbia, and they started condom distribution at that point, doing it by mobile service. Mm-hmm. And that was when I first met HIPS as a street-based sex worker in the District of Columbia, was because they brought condoms out on the strip to the sex workers to help them to protect themselves from STDs and HIV.
Right. I mean, at that point, we were very, very much, not that HIV has certainly gone away, it hasn't, but at that point in time, HIV was exploding on the streets, and needles, prohibitions by governments against needle sharing had actually led to the increase of HIV in the sex worker and the recovery population. So, it was against that backdrop that you folks literally retook the streets of D.C. for the people of D.C., correct?
Yes, we worked very hard to bring syringe exchange to the District of Columbia. Again, we built a coalition that we worked with to show them the health benefits of having exchange services in the district. And we eventually won that battle. And again, Congress tried to shoot it down, but we got it in anyway.
Now, give us, if you will, a snapshot of life in D.C. I mean, the District of Columbia is a very complicated community. You've got immense wealth, and you've still got, against a backdrop of gentrification, you've still got a significant population of the working poor. What's, give us a little insight into what life is what life is like, I would say, in D.C. right now. What kind of conflicts, what kind of issues are ordinary people faced with?
The District of Columbia right now is under heavy gentrification, and we have one of the most negative police forces in the country that side with the gentrification effort. They are harassing and arresting people and just doing a lot of egregious things for no justified cause. We have a violent crime epidemic in the District of Columbia, and they have this gun recovery team that goes out and assaults people. They assaulted residents in Ward 7 and stuck their finger in one of the gentlemen's behind. That's sexual assault the last time I checked. But that police officer is still working. We have no check system to the police here. So think about how we have all of these wonderful jobs coming into the District of Columbia, but they're not being offered to people that were long-term residents. They have hundreds of thousands of people coming into D.C., primarily white, cisgender males and females, that have no clue about what D.C. was about and have tried and come to change the whole way the District of Columbia operates. And then the expense of it. D.C. was already an expensive city. Now it is prohibitively expensive. We have a homelessness problem here that is untold. And it is absolutely ridiculous that we have a mayor that wants to give police $500 million for policing, but don't want to put equal amounts towards services for people that have been long-term citizens of that city. So there's a big divide when it comes to this issue of gentrification for people that have been long-term residents of the District of Columbia. And even when it comes to the policing problem, it has not gotten any better. We have been complaining for decades about police abuse and brutality, and we're still seeing this problem going on today. Even back in the day when I was primarily a street-based sex worker, we were experiencing violence from the police then. Sexual assault. They were extorting money from us. We have a very negative police force. So we have a lot of people that are pushing back, and a lot of those members happen to be a part of our coalition. And this is one way we see to reduce the amount of policing interactions between people that we work to benefit.
It's been said by many that a lot of the aspects of the war on drugs, stop and frisk, investigation of finances, harassment of families and children, have been employed on the war on sex workers that's currently taking place, which is being financed largely by a federal government through the use of non-governmental organizations to, again, work to eliminate sex work, as if that could be done, while at the same time working to marginalize the sex workers through what's called the Nordic model. Given that combination with federal legislation that's made it very difficult for folks in the sex worker community to use electronic communications, if for no other reason than to make their lives safer, how dangerous are the streets of DC for sex workers, particularly folks who are gay or trans?
It's extremely dangerous. That's why I moved to working indoors and was using online avenues to increase my own safety. When I was a street-based sex worker, I was robbed, I was raped, I was beaten, and I was also shot. In my own face, out of my habits, because I was able to vet my clients. This law that they put into effect, SESTA and FOSTA, better known as allowing states to fight online trafficking, conflated consensual sex work with sex trafficking. And see, the thing about this is that they're only targeting sex work when it comes to trafficking. They care nothing about any of the other labor markets where there are significantly more people involved to do anything about those.
Right.
Like the construction industry. Our own president brought people in from a foreign country to work on his properties before he was elected. So in my opinion, you're trafficking in workers because you know you can pay them less. That's trafficking. Then we have the issue with people that come here to work on farms. Nothing is done about it because these are immigrants who are afraid of being deported. So there's a lot that's not being talked about while they're pushing this idea that all sex work is trafficking. If that is the case, then my trafficker is the federal government.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely couldn't agree more. So how difficult was it, and this is instructive for folks who listen to this podcast or video in the future, how difficult was it politically to get legislation to the point where it's actively being considered by the city council? How much work did that take, and just how much politicking did it take?
Oh my, it took a lot. It took a lot. You know, when we first started out, we had two co-sponsors, and it didn't move. They didn't even consider it for a hearing. We were told to build constituent strength. We were told to continue to work with council members to bring them on board. And we did just that. But there's still a lot that needs to be done because we have some anti-trafficking organizations with that pushback talking about the partial criminalization. You know, the Nordic model,
right?
Because that's not partial criminalization, it's partial criminalization. One side is still being criminalized, which causes just as much problems. When you look at that partial criminalization effort, the buyer has control, which does not eliminate the problems that we face. It makes it just as bad and sometimes worse. When we have control, I can negotiate my price. When the buyer has control, he has all of the say. He says, I want to do it here for this amount, and I don't want to use a condom. When you have full decrim, you can negotiate for the sake to be like, okay, well, if you're not going to do it, then I don't have time to deal with you.
Right.
When you're talking about this partial criminalization effort, you still have a short amount of time to make the decision. Because if you don't, then your customer might get arrested, followed by the police, harassed. It does nothing for the sex worker. It does nothing to increase our safety. It does nothing to increase our health. So asking for a partial decrim is foolhardy. Full decrim is the only way, and then let's get this legalization off the table as well. Legalization puts tiers to the system, tiers that a lot of people cannot meet. We already have that issue going on in Nevada with brothels, where the brothel owner makes the decision on who's eligible to work. Me, as a transgender sex worker who is pre-op would not have a space there.
No, absolutely.
That is one reason why. And then there are cost obligations, things you have to register for, instead of just leaving it up to the individual to make the decision for themselves.
Do you find irony, and it's a sad irony, that we're in an environment where, fortunately, women have been aggressive, and particularly certain feminist groups, post-feminist groups, third-wave feminist groups. I'm not perfect on the lingo, so I apologize in advance. But you've got feminist groups who are advocating very strongly for control of their body, which I wholeheartedly support. They cite compelling statistics that in the absence of a legalized right to abortion, that you will push abortion into the back alleys, it will become dangerous again, it will become stigmatized again, and again, you'll have loss of control of the body. Now, compare that, if you will, to the same argument that can be made about sex workers. You, as someone who was in the community, made choices about how to use your body. Yet a lot of these same folks will, based on their obsession with the Nordic model, their obsession with conflating trafficking, and their obsession with virtue signaling on behalf of a community that simply wants to be left alone, would deny you the right to that same level of control over your body. How troubling is that?
It's very troubling because how much further can they go? If we allow them to restrict access to abortion, you're telling women that they don't have the mind to think for themselves. And the last time I checked, anybody above 18 is capable of making decisions of their own accord.
Right.
You are grown at 18. And I do not like anybody telling me what I can and cannot do. This country is supposed to be based on freedoms and liberties. We're supposed to be trying to extend more instead of have government stripping us of all of our rights and our freedoms. Women's health is akin to this movement for the same reasons, because it's about autonomy. I should have the ability to make a decision over how I use my body, no different than a man does. Men can go out here and play brutal sports that damage their body, even their brains, like football players.
Right.
That's a physical sport, just like sex is physical. They get damaged, but long as it's entertainment for a broad variety of people, it's okay. And somebody owns that team, it's all right. But then it's the same when it comes to boxers, those that play hockey. But what about me? Because I want to have sex, I have to have casual sex or under the guise of a marriage. But then I don't have choice to make a decision to sell that same sex in a country that has a very robust porn industry.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. Why are we allowing government to monitor what a woman does with her vagina? Or better yet, why is government monitoring what anybody does with their genitals? That is not their place. If anything, what government should be doing is facilitating that use with safety, with the health. Nothing more.
I agree completely. Folks, if you're just joining us, I'm on the line with Tamika Spellman. She is intimately involved with an organization called HIPS, and as well as DC Decrim Now. She's on the front lines on fighting and opposing the war on sex workers. At every single level, she's occupied every role imaginable, coming from the community itself now into a harm reduction role that also includes political advocacy, as well as political activism. This show, by the way, is sponsored, as always, by Air Sciences, airsciences.net. Daryl Gould and his hardy crew continue their battle on mold remediation, biohazards, both in your home, your office, and where you choose to live. hairsciences.net. Reach out to them, as in all our sponsors, who are willing to support challenging, controversial media like the Coalition. Tamika, thanks again for joining us tonight. You know, there are so many lessons here. Let's talk about the structure, if you will, of your organization. So you've got HIPS. You're supporting primarily people engaged in sex work, folks who are in the recovery or perhaps attempting to get into recovery, and trying to provide them with a degree of self-sufficiency. Most importantly, what you're looking to do is nothing less than tone down, eliminate the stigma, the violence, and the criminalization and oppression of folks who are involved with sex work. Again, DC is a complicated place. So you've got literally on one side of DC, you've got those who would purport to be the elite, the thought leaders, if you will, of our political process here. Do you get the sense at all from folks who live in DC, who work on the national political scene, that they are coming at any level to understand the challenges the sex worker community faces right in their hometown?
There are quite a few that understand the challenges. The thing about it is that they're so afraid of their constituents that they're forcing us to continue to build power. They're afraid of the anti-trafficking side because they keep throwing in the element of children. Well, the laws that have protections for children are still going to be in effect. So why are you still balking at adults being adults? You know, we have Congress trying to reach into the business of the District of Columbia, whereas we've gotten some significant things done as far as drug policy. Like we recently got part of our decrim bill for drug paraphernalia through. Nobody had anything to say about being within that 1,000 feet of a school. Not one word was raised. We got fentanyl testing strips permanently decriminalized, but then that's because they're afraid of white cisgender people that come from the suburbs getting caught up in drug use and not being able to better facilitate their safety. But then when it comes to sex work, they don't care about the street-based sex worker, which happens to primarily be black and brown people. They're more interested in the Hollywood madams and what they're doing, where they don't have the same type of issues, problems, and concerns that the street-based sex worker does because they work indoors. They have better access to being able to pay for these online venues that have sprung up after they shuttered Craigslist and Backpage.
Right.
You have to have bank-based credit cards to access some of these sites, which a lot of us don't. We have those prepaid debit cards that you go load in Rite Aid or CVS. So we have people that work in policy that's trying to change this. And the policy makers are the ones that we are having the issue with, bringing them on board, making them see that you're not standing with people that have significant problems with surviving.
Right.
And this is about people being able to thrive.
Right.
Unencumbered by, what's the word I'm trying to use? To begin with, why is this country penalizing grown people from having sex and being paid for it? We can do anything else in this country and be paid for it except for sex. Right. And when you look at it, the man in the White House had a sex worker situation in and of itself, but then people don't say anything about that.
Yes, he did.
Trump hanged Stormy Daniels was a sex worker situation. And then he had the gall and audacity to sign that law into the books. Well, as far as I'm concerned, he can still get it too. He should be charged just like they're making everybody else's life miserable. But see, when it comes to money and power and influence, he has those things, whereas the street-based sex worker does not.
And let's talk about some of the practical effects, if you will, on day-to-day life that folks who are not in this community, who have not been marginalized by this super set of federal laws. Something as simple as a checking account. Now, first of all, if you've been convicted at certain levels of quote unquote sex crimes, that you are a purveyor, if you will, it can make it very difficult to to have any sort of financial life whatsoever. On top of that, you've got the federal government now pressuring banks not to be involved with known sex workers, known sex work. They're making it very difficult for folks who are involved in the fetish end of business, the cam business, all of that, to have something as simple as a checking account, which brings so much dignity to a life of someone who's marginalized. I don't know if people understand how expensive life is if you can't have a bank account, and how expensive it is to be poor in America in 2019, do they?
They have absolutely no clue. Absolutely no clue. And then we haven't even touched on the fact that a lot of these sex workers have housing insecurity.
Right. Well, speak
You
to
know,
that,
when
speak
we
to that,
have
please.
all these records, these charges on us, that stops us from transitioning from the sex trade into other avenues of employment. That has been what has kept me from getting into politics for a long time, because that's where I went and I got my training in school, political science. But I couldn't work in that field because I kept getting charges for sex working. It was sex working, and then they would catch me with drug paraphernalia. I never got caught with the drugs, but it was like they knew I had the paraphernalia on me. But you know, once you've been stopped by the police, they feel like they have a right to keep stopping you and want to search you, want to go through your purse, your pockets. It has already been deemed unconstitutional to do stop and frisk, but they still do it.
Right.
They say, well, can I pat you down for my safety? And pat me down does not mean go in my damn pocket. Pat me down means just pat me down. If you do not feel a gun or a knife, stop going in people's pockets. Stop mistreating these people. Stop using your police authority to go above and beyond the scope of what you're supposed to be doing. When it comes to these finances, it took me a long time to get back to a good financial standing. And it is hell to build your credit back up. A lot of us are homeless because we do not have the great credit rating we need. We end up living in motels, renting rooms, bed, Airbnb a lot of times. And arresting us, taking us off of the streets, putting us in jail for hours on end affects our ability to have a roof over our head, to buy food, to take care of our family. I put 2 kids through college from sex work.
Wow.
I took care of my mother with sex work. They don't want to see that. All they think about is all this sex workers out here doing drugs. I did drugs still, but I did that after I took care of my responsibilities.
Right.
It's more to what I do as a sex worker outside of having sex. And all sex workers don't use drugs.
Right.
So these nefarious things that they think we're doing nothing different than what happens in a lot of people's bedrooms.
Right. And you know, you talk about housing. For many people, the first step off the streets is to get onto a public housing list, to take advantage of what programs might be available, simply so they're no longer sleeping on the streets. They're not engaging in survival sex, risky survival sex, in order literally to find a place to sleep. What impact does a conviction, a minor conviction for drugs or a conviction for sex work, have on your ability to get public housing to make that first step off the streets?
If you have a felony, you cannot get into any public housing. Your record follows you.
Forever.
When you have a felony, it's almost impossible to get a job. That's why I ended up working in fast food for so long. And I have a college degree. And when people think about working in fast food, they don't realize the fast food work in restaurant makes the money for the people on the top. They have nothing to say about the McDonald's corporate headquarters, that the CEO making $5 million a year, but then want to hoop and holler because those people think that they deserve $15 an hour, which is still a poverty wage in today's world. $15 an hour is a joke in D.C. Right. That is a joke.
Yeah, you certainly can't afford to live in D.C.
You need $35 an hour in the District of Columbia to have a place of your own with average rent. Right. And if you want a place of your own and to live comfortable in that place, you need $55 an hour. There aren't that many jobs that pay that kind of money. And where does a sex worker that does not have any education get that kind of job? They're stuck in low poverty wage jobs. And then the services, there's a big disconnect within the services. Public housing in D.C. is shrinking. Affordable housing is a joke. They're not replacing what they tear down. They're tearing it down and putting gentrified, high-cost condos and apartments in. One-bedroom apartments, not family apartments. They're not making it easier for us to get off of the streets. They're not making it easier for us to have services that actually work for people.
Right.
Our Department of Human Resources in the District of Columbia is a joke. And I stay at them at City Council telling them how dysfunctional it is. I have clients coming, DHR is right down the street from where I work at. And my clients come in all the time asking me to advocate on their behalf because they're down there mistreating them, pushing them out the doors, catching an attitude, calling security. Stop getting an attitude with the people that you're supposed to be serving, number one. You're there to perform a function. And your number one function is to help those who are at a disadvantage. Those are my tax dollars that you're being paid with. I expect them people to do their jobs above and beyond anything else.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the disconnect is. And then let's talk about these shelters. They're a joke. In the District of Columbia, we have some of the best shelters in this country, but then on that same token, they're still crap. They're dirty. The staff is ignorant. They mistreat people. They misgender transgender sex workers on transgender people consistently. Mm-hmm. Then we have the issue of them not providing enough safety. Here, I went and stayed in a shelter, and I was sexually assaulted. I wake up to someone fondling me. And I'm so afraid to even say anything, I just laid there and let them do what they did until they were done.
Yeah, and here...
I left because, number one, there are cameras in there. Why didn't you see someone all over on my bed and I'm within shot of the camera? Mm-hmm. Because they don't care. They think because I'm transgender that I like that kind of stuff. No, I don't. That's sexual assault.
All right. And here's
the services have to equal the need. And if it doesn't equal the need, then they need to readjust their budgets. And they're quick to steal money from education, to have more policing. But look at the fact that policing is not stopping the crime. People need resources. If we put more money into resources and less into policing, we can have more people working. Right. We can have more people that are stable, that don't commit criminal behavior, criminal acts. But that's not how our government works. And even when we show them the error of their ways, they don't change. The war on drugs has been a monumental failure. Have they changed any of the war on drugs policies?
No.
I rest my case.
Ultimately, no. Simultaneously, you've got recent federal legislation by the Trump administration that was designed to create enterprise zones, if you will, within inner cities. And instead of that money being used to act as incentives to create moderately priced housing, most of that money is being used to, again, subsidize luxury housing, which is a double-edged sword, because if you artificially tilt the market by creating these subsidies, then folks in the community literally have nowhere to go. Because, for my listeners in Rhode Island who don't understand the geography, there is no place to go outside of D.C. I mean, you're not going to find a reasonable apartment in Old Town, are you? I mean, there is no place to go.
There's no such thing as a reasonable apartment in Old Town.
And yet folks visiting the D.C. area will go to places like Old Town, and they'll remark about how wonderful this is, that the community is rebounding, and how fabulous that must be for the folks who live there. It's not. I guarantee you it's not. And to the effect that it's happening naturally, I don't know what you could do to stop it. But if in fact tax incentives, taxpayers' money, the very people who are being marginalized and shoved out of their community, if their money is going towards, which it is, to subsidizing ultimately the demise of affordable housing stock, that's just evil. I don't care what your political background is. That's just absolutely evil. And so
that is our government.
Right.
Our government is not working for the benefit of individual people.
Mm-hmm.
Our government works for corporations. The switch happens so smoothly, it is pathetic. Because see, I'm 52 years old. I've been watching politics since I was 10. So I have been watching the systematic change. How Congress sit there and they talk about campaign finance, but you all allowed this shit to happen. Both parties played to it. So I don't trust Republicans or Democrats. You're one of the same, in my opinion.
For the record, if folks are listening to this show for the first time, I'm a libertarian. I'm proud to say that the Libertarian Party, as part of its platform, integral within its statement of purpose, is a statement supporting the decriminalization of sex work for all people, and promoting once again the libertarian notion that of full ownership of one's body and full dominion over one's purpose. I just want to point that out editorially. So I'm no fan of the Republicans or Democrats either, Tamika. In the words of the old books, I have no truck for them whatsoever. You've got this, confluence, this Bermuda's Triangle, confluence of evil, working to squeeze people into indefensible positions financially, and then we're wondering why communities in the inner cities explode. I'll repeat time and time again that in the studies of Ferguson, Missouri, post-riots, 2 studies were conducted, one of which, of course, talks about the actual events. That was well publicized. What's not talked about is the study that was conducted by the Department of Justice, which investigated the climate between law enforcement and the community in Ferguson, and how that climate helped precipitate those desperate, terrible riots, based on one incendiary act. That we finally pushed people over the edge, and we continue to be shocked when you have a heavily militarized police abrogating the civil rights of the individual, disrespecting them, marginalizing them. Up here in New England, and you've probably heard this term before, we talk about the pipeline to prison. And ultimately, that's what's taking place in the seat of our capital, isn't it? You've got a coordinated plan by government, it's got to be planned, to take folks who are marginalized because of their income issues and then force them ultimately so they end up as part of the criminal justice system. And at that point, as you've aptly noted, there is no comeback, is there? It
is the modern age slaves industrial labor complex that they built. That's exactly what our government did. And when we're talking about Ferguson, Missouri, people do not realize that 66% of that municipality's income was generated to the court system. And the first line to the court system is the police.
Right.
The police generated 66% of a municipality's income. And they were using the people
Right.
to generate that money.
Right.
Court fee, fine, restitution, ticketing. It is absolutely ridiculous, knowing very well that a lot of these people were impoverished.
Right.
The amount of people that they were criminalizing in that municipality is absolutely ridiculous.
And in the presence of a militarized police who had no respect for the fundamental civil liberties of the populace, and a populace that was woefully undereducated as to what their civil liberties and their rights actually were, you had a perfect recipe for disaster, and that's exactly what occurred and will continue to occur in cities around this nation until we achieve some type of balance.
So we're talking about militarization of police forces in the United States of America, where we have zero terrorism. We have a lot of mass shootings. I can see them trying to rally around that issue. You know, I'm so sick of this crap coming out of government about these illegal aliens and all of the crime that comes from them. That's a lie. These are American citizens that are stuck in that criminal behavior. Every immigrant that I have ever known come here to get a job.
Right.
And they come here because of shit that's going on within their own country. And they don't want to be here. They would much rather be in their country of origin. How are we mistreating these people?
You would.
America was built on the fact that we were. I remember those little cartoons about how America was the melting pot of the world. But we've become the segregationists of the world now. Here we have a president talking about building a wall to keep people out. How the hell I know you're not building that wall to keep my black ass in here? To keep me from running from you, because y'all have done everything that you can to take as many people of color and put them behind prison walls to get slave labor. I'm not playing that game with them. And it is time that we work hard as hell to take all these powers Congress has put into place away. The Constitution needs to be broken down and rewritten, because the way it is written now, all of these laws that they have put into play are against people of color. It is a white patriarchal system that has been written on paper to keep black and brown people enslaved.
It's interesting. You wouldn't know this because we've literally just spoken once or twice briefly on the cell before chatting tonight. About a week or so ago, I happened to be in Mexico, just over the border, interviewing refugees who were trying to come over the border and establish refugee status. A couple of things that struck me that play right in support your argument. Number one, there were more checkpoints on the American side of the border than there were on the Mexican side of the border. I had to stop 3 different times on the way back from the New Mexico-Mexican border to be, eyeballed, scanned, radiation detected, God only knows what else, by American Border Control, well into New Mexico. I'm not just talking about border towns. What was similarly and equally appalling was the notion that the folks that I met, I spent time with folks who had literally walked from Central and Latin America to the New Mexican border. And to your point, every single one of them came from a place where they had trades and skills. I met an electrician from Cuba. I met a construction worker from Cuba. I met a number of folks who had skilled trades and had worked hard from places like Guatemala. And so the big lie is that these folks are going to come over and take advantage of our welfare system, when in fact, to your point, the reality is most of these folks just want a place to work, and quite frankly, they're fleeing violence that's been generated by the war on drugs in their countries, some of which their families have lived in for literally hundreds of years. And they come here basically fleeing violence that we've helped create. It's, the disconnect, is astonishing. You and I have never met, and here we are essentially relating what is common knowledge now amongst folks who are political activists. How is it that the rest of the country is immune to this?
I mean, I've seen this. I've seen it from my own eyes. Like I said, I've always been very politically aware, coming up as a kid, and then listening to news as a child and relating it to the things that I see today. I see very clearly exactly what our country has been doing.
Right.
You don't even see that type of talk anymore coming out of Congress. Right. About melting pot and walking with people, and Democrats and Republicans both play the game, but their end goal always is against us. That's their end goal. Because they want to talk about Trump with deportation, but y'all don't say nothing about Barack Obama. He did just as much.
Right.
Shut left onto the
Fact is
77 North Ramp.
what it is. Those are facts and evidence. It's not like it's a lie.
No, I agree
Then
with
we
you.
we have them talking this crap about how
In half a mile,
we're doing the best we can to eliminate drugs, this, that, too. Well, you know what? It has to stop. And the logical conclusion would be to legalize them.
Absolutely.
When we brought the harm reduction method into D.C. and started working with people that use injection drugs, a lot of them quit. Do you know why?
Why?
There's the allure to the criminality part of it has gone away from them.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people it just loses its luster. When you remember when we had prohibition of alcohol and all the crime that first around it?
Uh-huh. Absolutely.
When they stopped the prohibition, the crime went away. The same effect happened when it was marijuana prohibition.
Uh-huh.
Colorado was one of the states that legalized fully early on, and they saw a significant drop in crime. Do you know why? They stopped taking people to jail for marijuana possession. It wasn't a bunch of people out here running around shooting up people behind weed. That's foolishness and nonsense. That started with the crack epidemic, and that was because of the drug policies that were put in place behind it.
Uh-huh.
And if those policies did not exist in the beginning, we wouldn't have all of the crime that flourishes around prohibition. The same can be said about sex work. If we decriminalize sex work and the police actually start policing around the sex workers instead of policing the sex worker, crimes will go down.
Absolutely. No, I'm.
It's kind of.
You're 100% right. We've only got a couple minutes, so what is the next step with the District of Columbia City Council? When do hearings begin? What happens next?
So we are hoping to have a hearing this fall, but talking with a couple of the coalition members today, I think we're going to try and push it back to spring, because I think we need to do a little bit more work with our constituents. I don't want to go in there and have a bunch of people coming into the hearing and testifying and saying negative things. We need to start that off now so that when we have the hearing, it's not so bad.
Right. A lot of it's education, isn't it?
Yes, we need to do a little bit more education. We need to make sure that we're bringing in some of our partners that are part of the human trafficking movement.
Uh-huh.
Because there's a difference between those that are part of the human trafficking movement as opposed to those that are part of the anti-trafficking movement.
Right, absolutely.
See, the human traffickers, they believe that all trafficking is problematic. And they work towards freeing people that are in the labor market that are not sex work. just as hard. Whereas you have just people working solely on freeing people from the sex trade. Well, I choose to be in the sex trade. I chose it from the moment I started. And that was my decision. And I stand on it. And I still do sex work every opportunity I get. Because even though I do have a full-time position with HIPS, nonprofits don't pay market value. And I'm okay with that. It's not about the money with this job. It's about this movement. It's about freeing bodies from government oppression. It is about changing the narrative on who I am as a person. And it's horrible that I have to work so hard to humanize myself. But then when you look back at how black people were treated as cattle, chickens, as livestock, it's no different. We had to humanize ourselves to be looked upon as something different than a workhorse. That's pitiful.
Well, you are a warrior. I can't tell you how impressed I am by what you folks have accomplished down there in some of the most challenging political circumstances in the country. I hope we'll talk again soon. As I say to folks, if life finds you up here in New England, I hope you'll call and join us either here or even just for a cup of coffee, because it's your courage and the courage of the people in your organization to buck the system and to not accept that which is handed to you is an object lesson for every political activist in this nation. So first of all, I congratulate you. Please embrace your successes. Again, I'm on a mission with that, with folks who are activists now, because it seems like we're beaten down so often in so many different ways that when good things happen, it's those successes that you need to refuel yourself to take on to the next battle. So congratulations to you, your organization. I hope you'll give them our best wishes, our prayers, and our hopes for your continued success. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's been very, very instructive.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure, and I definitely will pass that to DeLong.
All right. Tamika Spellman, she is with HIPS. She is with Decrim Now, and they are doing amazing things right in our District of Columbia.
Bless you guys. Have a good night.
You too, buddy. We're going to take a quick break right now. Amy Joy Spellman is going to be joining us from Rhode Island Riders, Rhode Island RIPTA Riders, a same organization as the RIPTA Riders, repurposed a little bit of a new name, but ultimately the same challenges, the same questions, the same issues. They'll be joining us in just a minute. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network, here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we so love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And of course, the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where our Liberty page click will bring you the latest information on organizations like the Fire, ACLU, Goldwater, FEE, AIER, Reason, organizations, folks that we just spoke to, as we attempt to amplify their efforts and do original reporting on issues concerning your civil liberties and your rights from around the nation. We're going to take a minute or two off right now, and we'll be right back.